So when I got this topic and request to speak to you today, my first thought was, well, it's an unusual topic for a group of people who are maybe interested in doing research in the clinic, like you've just been hearing about, because that's not exactly what I do, and sort of how is this relevant? And then I thought, well, I see how what I'm doing is sort of a piece of this bigger picture of disseminating research, and particularly disseminating research to the participants in the research. Exactly what I do may not be exactly relevant to what you do, but I hope that we can maybe together think a little bit about, what's generalizable here, what could you use from the sorts of research that I do. So let me first tell you where I'm coming from. I do community-based research. And community in my world can be defined in a variety of ways, often geography, but sometimes common characteristics, common interests, variety of ways of thinking about community. And communities usually have some sort of coherence, so there's information flow within the community. In other words, it's not just an assortment of people who have a certain characteristic in common, but they are also speaking to each other in some way, whether it's in person or on the internet or whatever. The research I do has public health implications, but not so much about individuals. And the research that I do, what I'm talking about when I'm talking about disseminating my research is that I'm talking about disseminating aggregate results. I'm not talking about feeding back people's individual results to individuals. That's a rather different topic. So I want to show you my research team a few years ago, this is about 5 or 6 years ago now, put together a video where we were talking to people about, and these are community members, and all the people you will see are community members in the south side of Columbus, where we were doing research at the time. And we were talking to them about the question of, well, what are your concerns about researchers coming into your community? So, and I just am going to show a little 2-minute segment from this video that addresses this question of disseminating results to participants. Yep, it doesn't want to go big.
You fill out the surveys, you answer the questionnaires, and you don't know what happens to the information.
Typically, the researchers have not really cared enough about their subjects to bother getting back to them.
Oftentimes, we know when things start and we know when they end, but we don't know the results. So
sometimes this information is just collected for a project and put in a file cabinet. I think that's really bad business.
Building trust, I think, really requires that once the research is done, that folks hear back what it learned and what kind of impact it's going to have.
You come in and ask us a real poignant questions, some really questions like, oh yeah, they're finally going to come in and work on my issue, and then nothing ever happens. And see, I just knew it was just a game. They just come in here. Next time, they'll know she would bother knocking on my door because it's just a waste of my time.
I think that if they would concern themselves with thinking of the community or the specific area that they're targeted as somebody who is important, and they are important, that would make a big difference. And I think they've got probably a better response from those people as well.
It's not bad to sit in on a research, you know what I mean? Because you can learn a lot.
Okay. I just wanted that one segment about what the community people said about wanting to learn about results. I mean, first of all, I guess I would ask whether you have any reactions to that video or did it raise any thoughts for you about, how you might work with communities or what they're really asking for? Okay, well, we had as I said, the goal in making the video was to tell people doing research what community members want to know. Somebody once said to me that We need the opposite video as well. We need for the researchers to be able to tell the community what they want the community to know about research. And I think some of that will become obvious also. So some of the themes that I saw in that video, that communicating your results back to your participants creates an element of trust. The one man said, when I don't hear back, you might not even bother knocking on my door the next time because it's just a game and it doesn't benefit me. That people felt like it was a marker of respect for the community, that we tell people we value their participation, but in some ways it's not showing value if we then can't talk back to people and tell them, well, here's what we learned. It has implications, and this may be one of the most important things for all of us to think of as a research community, is that for these people it had implications for their continued participation in research. People are often asked to participate a number of times, and depending on how they were treated one time, they may or may not decide that they want to participate again. And also that one of the people commented on, that communities need to be at the table and part of the group that sort of is involved in deciding how the research results should be used. Communicating results is generally easier in situations where you've established some sort of tie with the community, where there's some sort of consistent interaction between the community and the researcher. They're even better if there's a true partnership where there is active involvement all along from participant groups, advisory committees, whatever. And again, you might want to think about that. Setting your own type of research may be very, very different from what I do. But is there a role for participants to be active in terms of participating, understanding, influencing the research? And we know there are many fields of research where there are activist patient groups, there are activist organizations that really, really want to be at the table. It's important as we think about communities, and this is particularly, I think, useful to those who are actually thinking about doing something that involves the community, is that there's a bunch of different ways to involve communities, and it's kind of a hierarchy, and one is not necessarily better than another, but it's important for us to think through what we're actually doing. First of all, there's the community as a setting. So we want to test something out. We want to go into a community setting and maybe try it out, whether it's a new measurement technique or a new program or whatever it is. And that sometimes can be appropriate, although that's probably the least involving of the community and the most likely to lead to problems down the road. Sometimes we almost treat the community as a target, where we think we're doing research with communities, but what we really want is we want the community members to change somehow, and we're going to study that process. Again, not terribly involving from the point of view of the community. The more respectful ways, I think, are the last two on the list. Community as a resource, that the community members participate in planning some aspects of the research. Maybe it's as simple as discussing with various community groups the best ways to recruit participants from the community, the best places to do the research, the kinds of messages you may want to convey, that sort of thing. The research is, you've got it planned, but you're getting some input from community members. The last one really falls into this category that is commonly called community-based participatory research, where the community is an active agent. They are actively involved in things like helping to frame the research question. They are expressing their interest and enthusiasm for particular research directions that would involve their community. And obviously then we have a lot of working with to do. That one's very tricky, of course, because of the back and forth between what the community wants and what the research community needs and what the funders want to see and so forth. I mean, it's very difficult to really pull that one off coherently, and it takes a long-term community partnership to do that. Most of my work, frankly, has been a little bit more in the third bullet with community as a resource, where community's been involved, community's participated, has not necessarily set the research agenda. I'm going to tell you a couple of experiences I've had working in communities and sort of what I learned from those experiences. One of the first, probably the first time I had any really intensive experience working with communities in doing research was that I was a co-investigator a number of years ago on something called the Little Ears Study, which was a study of otitis media in American Indians. At the time, I was a faculty member at the University of Minnesota, and there's a fairly large Native American community in Minnesota. And this particular study involved the residents on 3 reservations in northern Minnesota, as well as in one urban Indian community. One of the interesting things about working with Native Americans is that the communities tend to be very well organized. They have, internal structures, which you often don't find in sort of loosely defined communities, so that there's very clear interaction between the researcher and the community. And one of the very first lessons you learn is that you don't go to a reservation wanting to do research unless you have completely vetted the idea and completely had buy-in from the tribal leadership. You don't set foot on the reservation without that, really. And then one of the things that the leadership made very clear to us early on in this research was that they wanted the results presented directly to the community. So all along, this was an epidemiologic study. It had to do with factors in infancy and early childhood otitis media. And one of the reasons, of course, that we were interested is that Native Americans tend to have a pretty high prevalence of or incidence of otitis media. So all along, not only were the community leadership involved in the planning and what they wanted to see out of the research, we traveled to the reservation several times during the course of the study to talk about the ongoing issues, the data collection we were doing, the how we were going about recruiting, could we be doing things in a better way, that sort of thing. At the end of the study, when all the data had been collected and analyzed, we then, as the research team as a whole, traveled to all of the reservations and made presentations at each reservation and the urban community, made presentations, two separate presentations, one to the community member groups and one to the healthcare providers that were usually part of the Indian health system on the reservations. And it was an interesting experience. And in many cases, traveling to these northern Minnesota Native American communities from the Twin Cities where the University of Minnesota is located, it's a long drive. It's like a 6-hour drive to get up there, so it's a big state. So we were putting in a lot of miles and a lot of time traveling as a team. And a lot of times we didn't have huge turnout from community members. I think what was important to the community was that we came, not so much that everybody was present to hear the results. With the healthcare provider groups, we had somewhat better turnout, but that's probably because we did it at lunch and learn things. They had to eat lunch anyway, and we were in the room, so they had to listen. I'll talk more about that in a minute. Another experience that I had more recently is the one where we made the video. And that was, I was PI of the Prevention Research Center here at Ohio State, which focused on early childhood obesity, and we were focusing our research in South Columbus. And we were doing a variety of things to understand something about the high level of early childhood obesity in Columbus, We were doing focus groups, we were doing surveys, we were doing some work with the daycares. I mean, a variety of different things that we were trying to learn some of the roots of the problem. Again, we were very involved. We attended a lot of community meetings, both before and during the time we were doing the research. We also then, at the end, shared the results in a variety of ways. We talking to the different community groups that we've been involved with, they sort of let us know that they didn't think that attempting to hold big community-wide presentations of data in the South Columbus neighborhoods was likely to be successful. That hearing data presentations was sort of not, people wanted the results, but not that way, basically. So what we did was a number of things. We developed pamphlets, brochures, handouts for the different pieces of research we had done that were sort of targeted to the community groups in question. Really 4 technically different brochures we developed. 2 of them were aimed at the daycares, because we had done a lot of work with the daycares along the ways, and those were rather specific to different types of daycares. There was one sort of general population pamphlet about what we'd learned about, sort of community resources, things people maybe had more trouble with in the community in terms of behaviors underlying obesity. And a final one that was aimed at some of the more structural issues, and that one was directed particularly at city leadership. We presented, while we were developing those pamphlets, we, at various points, sort of field tested them with different community groups. We got lots and lots of input on, different ways of showing the data, different ways of presenting results, that sort of thing, back and forth. And finally got the pamphlets done. When we finished them, we distributed them through as many channels as we could figure out. Some of it was in community settings. We, had stacks of them in libraries. We had, handouts at clinics, and just as many ways as we could think of to hand out the pamphlets, depending on the particular group. We did make a few presentations to established community committees that were interested in the results, and we made one presentation to city leadership talking about some of the things that we thought structurally could be issues in the community. Overall, what are some of the lessons learned? And again, like I said, your research is probably very different, but some of these lessons I think are probably generalizable. First of all, both of these experiences had to be sort of baked in from the beginning. They had to be planned from the start because they take time and they take money, and they have to somehow occur before the money runs out and the time runs out. Not such a big problem in working in Columbus and having the South Columbus community, but a very big problem, when we were doing the Native American study. So that planning that we will be back, here's what we will do, had to happen from the beginning. We did have to listen to the community concerns and reactions to the findings and think about how we were interpreting things, how we were saying things, and it gave us some rather useful insights and reactions. And even if the community, even if parts of the community, because the community never speaks with one voice, right? Even if aspects of the community don't seem all that interested in your finding, I still think that making the effort is a good thing for community relations and hopefully a good thing for subsequent research. There are issues in doing even this kind of work and feedback. Timing is a big one. This lag between the time participation ends and the time results are ready. And you're all probably really familiar with that problem, and it's a very difficult thing to convey to people, that the fact that we finished data collection last month doesn't mean we can come today and present results, because it takes longer than that to digest, interpret, even to clean the data. And that's one of the back and forth pieces that can create some tension with communities, but at the same time, it's one of those, what we would like communities to know about doing research, which is an important part of what we're conveying, is the fact that it takes time and it takes effort and it doesn't happen instantaneously. Depending on your type of research and your how you're presenting it, you may also have to, sort of delay your responses to the community until you're ready to make scientific presentations. It kind of depends on your judgment of how that tension is going to play out. There are also some issues with the types of finding to present. As a colleague once said to me, one of the things I would really like to be able to convey to the community about research is it doesn't always end the way we wanted it to. We don't always find what we thought we were going to find. And when you have found findings that are either unexpected or ambiguous or even counter to what you hypothesized, you have to be not only ready to share those, but ready to discuss them and interpret them. And we did have some of that issue with the Little Ears study in particular, in that some of the factors we had hypothesized to be related to the high levels of otitis media, in fact, were not related in these communities, and we had to be prepared to face questions and answer them honestly and straightforwardly to a group that is not particularly trained scientifically. So, you can't sort of hide behind scientific explanation. I mean, they are scientific explanations, but you have to be able to say them clearly to a community group, why you didn't find things the way you expected to and what it was you did find. So results can be ambiguous. And so this back and forth communication can be a real challenge. But I think it's part of our learning to work with communities and communities learning to work with us. And I think there's some fundamental appreciation of people that, we are sharing the truth with them. This is what we learned. Is it required to go and communicate your research back to communities? No, there's no board or anything I know of that requires that you do this. There are reasons to do it. A lot of people think that it falls under the general human subjects heading of respect for persons, that we're showing respect to the communities by feeding back information. There are certainly, in our case, the organized Native American communities, but in a lot of examples of activist groups involved in different kinds of research where there are pretty intense pressures and demands to be informed. The mantra which came out of the disability studies group, nothing about us without us, has been carried on by many other groups who feel very strongly about this. And you could see a little bit of that in the video. And then there are some funders who also are pressing more in this direction. So it is something that needs to be thought about. It isn't probably something that needs to be done every time, but it is, I think, good practice. Benefits to it are you're more likely to be welcome to work with this community or this group of people again if you have shown this kind of respect all along. Sometimes it provides you with new insights or richer interpretations of your data to have people say, well, probably the reason you found that was this, and you may or may not agree that that's the interpretation, but it gives you some food for thought and perhaps something else to be researched. And, really, truly, not only are we setting up benefits for ourselves if we want to go back to the community again, but we may be setting up benefits for the next researcher who wants to go into that community to not have this sort of negative carry forward of, the last people that were here, we never heard from them again. So I think that's important as well. It's part of our obligations to our own community. So, I'd certainly be interested in your comments and questions, and also whether you have any experiences to share, because as I said, I think my particular kind of research and my take on this is just one slice of the whole picture, and there are many, many things to be thought about in terms of interacting with communities and groups. Anybody got anything for me?
I have a question, and I also have an example. My question is, did you learn anything that you were able to give recommendations to these different populations?
We did, particularly in the prevention research study of childhood obesity. That was one of our sort of goals of the study, was to learn some recommendations. And we tried to, particularly when we presented to the community leaders, we tried to make some very specific recommendations about some resource issues that we saw in the community. So yeah, we had that in mind all along.
I was involved with a huge cohort. It was the childhood cancer survivor study, and there was over like 33,000 participants, and the people who, because it was a retro study, and people really wanted information, because the cohort had aged and they became adults. And so what we did was we just developed a newsletter and just sort of communicated I think it was quarterly. And then it also allowed for other rollout studies, like a smoking cessation or some of the things that we discovered that we were able to roll out, different studies. But in my professional experience, people who participate, it's sort of a give and take. They're giving us information, but they also, want information back.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and I thought about, should I incorporate something about the use of newsletters, because I think it's a great strategy. I mean, the problem people sometimes run into is if they're only thinking of a newsletter in terms of communicating their own research, there's this big lag time in the middle of the study between the time you started it and when you have anything to say. But there are you can share other things from the research world. You can share other kinds of research that are relevant to this group. So, I mean, there's fodder there, but you really have to think it through. What are we going to be sharing with this? Because I've definitely seen some people think, we're going to share our research. And I'm thinking, well, not for a few years, you're not. Yeah. I haven't personally. I think I'm too old, but, I think that obviously social media is how people are sharing everything. It becomes much more important to think about that, and I think some of my younger colleagues are starting to think in that direction. But it's a great suggestion. Okay, well, best of luck.